Good evening. I'm Mohammed Moise from Istanbul, and this is Turkey's Economic Brief. Today, I just have several things to discuss with you. First of all, I will discuss the sovereign wealth fund that the Turkish government recently created. Recently, the Turkish government transferred a number of its assets from different organizations to a sovereign wealth fund. The fund is created to finance development projects, infrastructure projects actually, such as bridges, roads, airports, seaports, and so on. And before I get into that, actually, I wanted to kind of give an overview of what a sovereign wealth fund is to viewers who might not know about it. So a sovereign wealth fund is it's an investment fund which is controlled by the government in order to finance different development projects. It's in order to protect some surplus revenues that they might have and to generate profits. Also, it helps stabilize a country's economy through diversification. By that, I mean, for example, there are some countries which depend on only a few resources, such as some Gulf states which depend on oil, and their economy depends on, it's an oil-based economy. So to protect that risk that comes along with that, they diversify the revenues which come from those the oil revenues into other you could say into other investments or into projects for development. So this is nothing new. The first sovereign wealth fund was actually created in 1953, and today actually up until 2012 a total worth of $5 trillion was in sovereign wealth funds around the globe. And some of the bigger sovereign wealth funds around the world include the Government Pension Fund of Norway, which is $885 billion. And China also has some large sovereign wealth funds, such as the China Investment Corporation, which is over $800 billion worth. Safe Investment Company, which is almost $500 billion worth. And UAE also has them. Like I was mentioning, the Gulf states have some large investment funds, sovereign investment funds, wealth funds, and Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is almost $800 billion. Anyways, so back to Turkey. Of course, Turkey's sovereign wealth fund will not be as big as those because it is just starting out. However, there are some very large organizations which are going to be a part of this in a way that the Turkish government is transferring their assets to this fund. For example, Ziraat Bank, Borsa Istanbul, which actually controls the Istanbul Stock Exchange, and as well as Turkish Airlines are among others to have their assets, some of their assets transferred to this fund and contribute to this fund. And the fund will actually make it easier for the government to be able to finance their projects, and because they will have control over this fund, and it just gives them this funding option. So yeah, we hope that it leads to actually increased development projects and infrastructure projects. We know there are some big projects coming up for Istanbul and for Turkey, and hopefully this fund will finance those. Secondly, we see that there's an increase in lending power. Actually, the Turkish EXIM Bank recently announced that they plan on providing $40 billion in loans and insurance to more than 100,000 companies. Last year, this amount was $33 billion, which was actually divided up into $22 billion for as loans and $11 billion for insurance. And this year, it's up to $40 billion, which will, of course, help export companies, because the EXIM Bank is basically, it helps those export companies become funded. And in an early video, I actually discussed the increased exports from Turkey in January, and hopefully the increase in this funding will also help exports further increase in the future, in the coming months. And lastly, there are the new startups. We know that SMEs are a driver for economic growth, and the Turkish Union of Chamber and Commodity Exchanges released the data for January 2015 of the new companies established in Turkey, and there were a little over 6,200 companies established in the month of January, as compared to 6,835 which were established in January of 2016. It's a slight decrease, but that's okay. And out of these, 359 companies were established with foreign partners. and almost 40% of those with the foreign partners are established by Syrians. And we know that the Syrian war crisis, which has been going on since 2011, over 2.8 million refugees have come into Turkey since that time up to now, and they have actually been contributing to economic growth as well. And we see that through the fact that since 2011, 5,000 firms have been established by Syrians in Turkey. I will actually discuss this issue in another video, in a separate video, where I will just talk about the integration of Syrians in Turkey, and what steps have been taken and what steps can be taken in the future to speed up the process. That's it for this week. I've decided to change the Turkey's economic brief from weekly to every other week. This is why I didn't have a video last week. So I'll have a video next week, in the first week of March, to summarize the events in February. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And that's it from Istanbul. Have a good weekend.